Nice.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to VMN Business Talk. Today, we are diving into the power of storytelling, how to use it to elevate your business and brand. If you'd like to watch our past episodes covering business and marketing, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible, and YouTube. We truly appreciate your follows, comments, and likes. They help us bring even more valuable conversations your way. My name is Diana Spinka. I'm the producer of this show. And as always, I'm here with our host, networking and marketing expert, Victor Nichols. Good morning, Victor. We're thrilled to welcome today's guest, Ivy Charmatz, the perfect person to talk to about storytelling. Ivy is a four-time New York Emmy Award-winning storyteller and journalist who served as the executive producer of news and special projects for News 12 New Jersey. Now she is a senior vice president at Mercury Public Affairs, where she specializes in storytelling, strategic communications, media relations, and crisis management. And that's just the beginning of her impressive career.
That's just
Ivy,
right.
Ivy, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank
It's
you
an
so
honor,
much. Thank you.
it's an honor to have you here with us. So, for a start, can you please tell us how storytelling became such a core part of your career?
I would love to. Thank you both so much for having me here. You are doing so it's such amazing work through these streams, and it's an honor for me to be a part of it. So storytelling for me actually is felt very personal from the beginning. My all of my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and I remember hearing about some of those stories when I was younger. And my mother's father, my grandpa David, he was the happiest, most joyful, loving man that you could imagine. If you imagine the most loving man in the world, that's exactly who he was. So happy. And I remember being a little girl at one point, and I remember this thought: if you didn't know his story, you would have no idea of who he was. And so I sort of became intrigued at the idea of learning about everything that led to the moment of how you showed up just like this. Like in this moment, we are the culmination of everything that's happened to us in every moment up until this very moment. That helps us determine how we show up. It explains why we are the way we are sometimes. It explains how we tell the stories we tell, what stories we tell, what's important to us, what our perspectives are. And I think the more we learn about that journey that people go on, the more we're able to connect with people, and not just connect on a superficial level, but have meaningful connections. And I think that's makes the world a better place. So that to me is really why storytelling is so powerful. And then when because my love of storytelling kind of pushed me into the world of journalism to help other people tell their stories. And what I realized is that we all have a story. Everybody has a story. It's the most valuable thing you have. It doesn't matter what you own. It doesn't matter where you live. Nothing matters as much as your story, because it's the one thing that no one else has other than you. And as a journalist, I got to spend many years telling other people's stories and seeing the ripple effect of just telling those stories had in the world around them.
Well, I'm so glad we got that on tape. Because that's truly that really isn't it really where it all starts though is the telling of a story,
Yeah.
right? Your person, like you said, your personality, what you do in business, what you do personally, how you've gotten to where you and I haven't given it as much thought as you, Ivy, because you kind of just live it like we all kind of live our everyday.
Mhm.
But then when I think about it, I really think about it when I think about business, about my business. I think about the storytelling of my business, which is different than if you're having beers with somebody and they
Sure.
ask you, oh, and you're telling a story, as opposed when you're telling a story that has to do with what you're trying to sell or a message you're trying to get across. So I just think that everything starts with the story.
Everything is storytelling, and I know we're going to talk about this a little bit, but I think successful storytelling in business comes from the same place, because it's that authenticity of who you are that makes it real and helps you build those connections.
Good point.
Yeah. What were some of the most powerful stories that you've ever told that made like the most lasting impact?
Well, so there are a few that come to mind, but one of the first ones that I always that I always think about, because it like kind of lives in my heart, is there was a group when I was at News 12. There was a couple that had started a group because they had a son who had Down syndrome. And they realized that when his son turned 19, he had aged out of all of the programs that were available. And so they started this group, and it was for adults with special needs who had aged out of the other programs. And it was a way for them to maintain a social life. And they had had this program for, 20 something years. And I found out about it through a friend who was related to the couple. And we did a story about it. And I remember we did the story about the couple and about their son. And we were at one of the events, and the story aired on a Thursday night. And Friday afternoon, I get a call from the couple, from the woman, telling me that in all the years that she had been doing this, all of a sudden now she's getting calls from people saying, I didn't know that this existed. I didn't know that this was something. And thank God for this. Now I have someone who can be a part of this. I've been looking for something for my, adult child to do. And storytelling inspires, educates, it builds community. And in that moment, to know that we were helping to build community so people didn't feel alone, they found a service that was something that they needed, that they desired. That was, that made me feel like a teeny tiny, small, tiny part in helping someone get the help and find the community, that they needed. We many years ago also, we decided to take a look at New Jersey's heroin. I promise not all my stories are sad. We promised to do we did a story about New Jersey's heroin epidemic. And it was very raw and very real, and people were very open and honest with us. And after the story aired, we had someone call the station and say, they didn't want to give us their name, but they said that they saw what we did, and this was their moment to get help. And they just wanted to thank us. And I think about that woman all the time. I wish she would have given us her name so we could have followed up. But you realize in that moment that sharing vulnerability, sharing struggle, sharing the things that are real life is what connects with people who are going through the same things, and then motivates them to take action.
So basically, acts as a catalyst. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all about connecting with people, right? And
Yes.
I'm sure that there are many people that had impact on from your stories. It's just not everybody reaches out to you and and give you feedback.
Right.
So if we talk about business and brands, how businesses can use storytelling effectively to build stronger relationships with their audience? Is it about sharing vulnerability? Is it about being authentic? Is it everything? Can you tell me a little bit about it?
So I always think authenticity has to be a component, right? We always want to show up personally and with our brand with what we really are. There's that saying, when we try to be someone else, it's like wearing a costume, right? You don't want to wear a costume in your business. You want to be your authentic self, who you really are. And when we work with clients now, one of the first things that we always say is, let's work backwards, right? I say, let's work backwards. Who's your audience and what do you want them to do? What do you want them to feel? And then once we've established that, now you can kind of figure out, okay, well, what is the message? What is the best way to deliver the message? How are we going to, what is the call to action? What do we want them to feel? And when you think of it that way, it allows you to craft your messaging based on who you are and how who you are is going to relate to the people that you want to touch.
Right. So what are the ways, like proven ways that you use with clients to build this connection throughout the time? I understand that it's not like you share your story and, you know, all of a sudden everybody's like, oh, I want to buy things from you because, you know, I relate to your story. Like it should be built over time, maybe years, right? Months, years, days. What are the proven strategies that you use with your clients?
So I think it's a combination of a few things. And if we're talking about branding, for example, and I'm not going to use my clients for this example, but let's talk about something that everyone is familiar with, and like the Dove beauty campaign, okay? Because I think that that's such a powerful example of how knowing your audience and being authentic to your audience has shown how powerful that can be. So one of the first things that we also always tell people is, if your message is for everybody, it's the wrong message. Your message should not. Your message should be speaking to exactly who you want it to speak to. It's okay if some people don't get it. That's okay. So think about Dove, for example, and this is one of the reasons why I like this example. Dove made a decision that their audience is real women, and they are going to focus on real women and real beauty, and not the models, and not look at beauty from a superficial point of view, but look at it the way real women look at themselves and the way they consider beauty and the products that they use. And they created this entire campaign that was based on realness and authenticity, and it worked. And it worked because people saw that message and said, oh, that's me. That's me. I can be my true self. This is a brand that's speaking to my true self. And that, when you think in terms of how does authenticity work to market a business, like, to me, that's always the best example of a brand that really succeeded in doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sure.
by telling the story, right?
By telling the story that this is like, look, by telling the story and being real about it. Look, we're not perfect. We don't have perfect skin. We don't have perfect hair, right? But it's okay. We're all in this together, and this is the products that we're using. This is who we are. This is what our brand says. And when you use our brand, this is kind of what you're buying into. You're buying into this story that we've created when you use our brand.
And that resonates with that consumer.
It resonates with that consumer. But think about it. Does it resonate with every consumer? No, probably not, right? But that's okay. You can.
Definitely not. Yeah, sure. Definitely not. For sure.
Exactly. But you have success because you target in on your audience, and you know that's who you're speaking to. You're speaking directly to that person.
And I guess that targeting too also makes you're building community, right? And it also makes the target feel special because you're not talking to everyone, right?
Yes.
So you're creating that feeling of almost, I'm going to use the word exclusivity for lack of a better word, but that feeling of, hey, I'm part of something, right? And by the way, you're talking to me.
You're building community. You're building community, and you feel like you're a part of the community. You know, there's a woman that I've done some work with, who is she's a life coach, and it's Katie Carroll Coaching, and she's not a coach for everybody. She has decided that she has a very specific target. And why does she have that target, by the way? Because she experienced stuff that she went through. She's a nurse. She was dealing with burnout issues, and she realized that there was a market to help caregivers who deal with burnout. And how does she reach them? She says, listen, I dealt with burnout. I know what it's all about. I was doing all this and I felt this. If you're doing all this and you also feel this, I'm your girl.
Right.
I'm your coach. And it works. She's not for everybody, but for the people who can relate to her story, she is like the best thing since sliced bread because she gets it. And her clients know that she gets it because she shares herself in that way.
Mhm.
That's,
Yeah.
that's key. That's
So
key.
for everyone who is watching us live, or if you're listening to us later, don't hesitate to ask questions. We'll make sure that we reply to every question. And while we're live, it's you can get help with your branding, with your storytelling in real time. So don't hesitate to do that.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah.
So I see that like there are so many businesses, so many brands, and there are very few that stand out. And usually, not always the case, but usually it comes from the owner or the founder. If the founder has shares their values, if the founder has authentic voice, it always translates to the business. But what if like just a regular business, they like how to find, I guess the question is how the founder or the business find this authentic voice. Like where do they start, what do they do to make their brand different?
So I will say that your voice isn't something that you find. Your voice is something that you just have to embrace. Because sometimes if you try to find your voice, you end up creating a character, and that's not necessarily going to be who you are. So if you're trying to embrace your voice, right? Who are you going to how are you going to show up? You have to think about what are the values that are important to you? What is the perspective that you want to share? What are the experiences that you have that can be of value? And if you can sit and think about those things and how that again has brought you to this moment, that will help guide you into how to embrace your voice. So, um, sometimes it's in the way we communicate that your authentic voice comes through. So, for example, um, sharing a little bit of vulnerability um, is the key to connection. But I'm just going to say, whenever we talk about vulnerability, I always say, I think it was Brene Brown that said, "Share from the scar, not from the wound." Right? We vulnerability without a takeaway or without a lesson or without inspiration is called complaining. So we don't so we don't want to be complainers. But by showing that, if I am coming to you as a consultant or as a business owner, and I'm telling you that I'm solving a problem for you, and I'm solving this problem for you because I know what this problem is, and maybe I've even messed up, and this is how I got to this point. Well, that imperfection is what builds trust. It's what builds connectivity, and so I think we all have the voice that's inside of us. We all have what our perspective is. And it's just a matter of kind of sitting quietly and thinking like, all right, how would I talk to myself as a potential customer, as a potential client? What would I want to hear that would motivate me or make me feel something? And when we can make someone feel something, we can get them to act on something. That's the best motivator.
That is so on point. I also the kinds of things that happen in your personal life and how they can be conveyed into your business life. And I'm going to share a story with you because it was profound to me, and I'm going to mention a very dear friend of mine, but it was a very profound thing about friendship and showing up. And I remember having this conversation, telling the story that I'm about to tell to one of my clients, and it affected that client like almost as much as it affected me. So it was, I believe it was my mom's birthday. This is some years back. And I have a very dear friend. His name is Albert Anuna, and he owns a very successful, he owns a company called Biogenetics. Okay. And he was my next door neighbor. So I knew Al for many, many years, and he's always been a part of our lives and friends and all of the rest. Babysat his kids, the whole nine yards. My mom's birthday, and he showed up at my parents' house in Maplewood with this custom made cake from New York City. Like this, like you have to like call in advance and make all kinds of things and stand on your head and the whole nine yards in order to get these people to make you a cake. All right. So he has this special cake made, and he comes and he rings the doorbell. It's for my mom's birthday. Open the door. It's happy birthday. He's there. And it was very painful to tell him that it was the wrong day. Okay. And he, because he's such an amazing human being, came in, we had fun. We still, we talked and had something to eat, whatever it was. Okay. Now, when the actual day came around, I think it was a week later or 2 weeks later, he showed up again with another cake.
Wow.
And it was such, it said, this is not somebody who's simply a friend. This is somebody who shows up.
Yeah.
Shows you the value of showing up. I have never forgotten it. I never will forget it. And whenever I tell the story, it makes me, warm, because this is, and he did the same, another beautiful cake, handmade, oh my yards. But he was on the right day this time. Okay. And, we had the birthday cake and everything. So I share that story because it bridges business. It bridges the idea of showing up, and it bridges the idea of friendship and what that really means, and how you can actually form relationships that are friendships and business relationships and things, and they can converge as well. So, but again, conveying that sentiment through a story. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Although it's possible he's just a guy that likes cake.
There's a guy you got to meet. He's an amazing human being.
No, but I think what you're saying though is so true, and it also it's also worth mentioning that how you show up is part of your story. How you show up everywhere is part of your story, and that's why authenticity is so important. Because if you're your authentic self, you don't have to think about it. It's just it's just who you are. It's just what your values are. It's just what your experiences are, and it just is who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I guess you can't work on that. It's building your DNA, right? You can just work on revealing it, being comfortable with it, but not really to make it look a certain way.
Absolutely. And you can work on narratives, right? You can work on how you tell the story. You can work on how you share what your experiences have been. But at the core, I think to have success, it has to be true to who you are. And we've seen that in other brands too. I mean, I always think of, Bomba Socks, for example, right? Bomba Socks is a great success story because they decided that for every pair of socks that you buy, they're gonna donate one. And that was their story. This was what was important to them. And by sharing that, they have certainly built community because they've enabled people to become a part of this effort. And it was because they shared what their value was, right? Their socks are probably a little more than other socks, but people buy them because they believe in what their story is. They believe in what they're doing, and they know that when you buy those socks, you're contributing to that effort. And so that's just another example of how being true to your values is how you get the customers you want too, right? You want customers and clients that are in alignment with what your values are and with who you are.
And that turns them into that also with that alignment, turns them into clients who stay with you, right? Because that's the other big thing about running businesses and building businesses.
Right.
There's people who are running to acquire new clients, but they're not spending the time on the retention. And every day I say this. It's like, it's far easier to retain a client than it is to get a new one.
Less expensive too, right? Less expensive to keep a client than it is to get a new one. Absolutely.
If more businesses focused on retention as opposed to just acquisition, and I think, and one of the, obviously there's many verticals with this is true. It's probably true of every business, but we do deal with a lot of institutions of higher education, right? And you see it's acquire that new student, acquire that new student, acquire that new student, and that's fantastic. And when you acquire that new student, if they only stay for one semester, okay, you've spent all that money in the acquisition, but you didn't have the things in place in order to keep them as 4 years, right? Yeah. That's because that's where the money is. The money's in the 4 years. It's not in the first 2 semesters,
Well, and that's also why, think about why customer service is so important too, because customer service, that's part of your story. Customer service, when someone anyone that answers the phone for your company, anyone that speaks on behalf of your company has to be a part of the storyline, because every time someone picks up the phone, all of a sudden they are the company, right? It doesn't matter who anyone else is. If I'm answering the phone, I am the company. As someone that talks to me isn't going to say anything about me personally. They're going to talk about the company that they called, which is why it's everyone's got to be a part of this.
It's, Ivy, the fact that you said that, years ago when I started my business in the printing business, I, farmed out some printing as well. I had my own printing business, but I had a farmed out thing that I couldn't do, numbering and things like that. And I was standing in one of the small print shops. This was decades ago now. He was a vendor of mine, right? And I was waiting for this thing to come in, and it's a small shop, and the phone rings. And he's working on the press. He's a one-man show. And I said, don't worry, bro. I'll take it. I'll take the note and whatever. I pick up the phone and I say the name of the company. And I said, hi, this is Vic Nichols. I said, how can I possibly help you? And he says, well, I want this. And I got out a pen and paper and I took down what he wanted and just took down his order. I said, oh, that's fantastic. I said, what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to make sure I get back to you and let you know when we can get this done and when you can drop off the artwork and blah, 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 blah. Right? I hung up the phone. This guy calls the owner the next day and says, your new employee is unfreaking believable. Okay. Because everybody who answered the phone was like pissed off that they had to pick up the phone. Yeah. You know what I mean? And it sent a light bulb off of his head. He said, oh my God, the customer service part of my business is as important as me delivering this stuff on time.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
Because I was front line. This guy was like, wow, this guy's fantastic, man. A good hire. So, and it stuck with me. And I'm like, because that's back to what you were saying. It's just the way I am, because I'm a sales and customer service kind of guy. But that was so funny. And he said to me, he hired somebody after that.
Yeah. See?
It is front line. It is front line.
Absolutely.
We have a comment from Japes. He's saying storytelling really shapes how we connect with customers. Can't wait to learn more fresh tips from Ivy. So Ivy, question to you. Do you have any fresh tips? To connect?
Fresh tips. One of the things that is always an interesting exercise for us to do is when someone, I'm going to put my PR hat on now. But when someone talks about, oh my God, this thing that our business is doing, that our company is doing is like so cool. We want everyone to know about it. And I always stop for a second and we say, why would someone care about this? And I'm not saying that in a snarky way. It's really an exercise in, sometimes we work so hard on things and we're so proud when we've accomplished them. And we sort of miss the point in why this matters to other people. The behind the scenes stuff matters to us because we finally accomplished this and we're so excited about it. And it's so great for our business. But the key is finding, okay, we've done all this. This might not be the most important thing to our client or to our customer, but here's the piece that is. And so that's why, you got to talk things through. It helps to have a professional or even just, the people around you think about your target audience, right? Why would your target audience care about this thing that you want to promote about your business? And figure out the storyline that connects what you want to share to your audience. And that's a fun exercise, I think, to do, that we can all continue to do and do more of. But that's really how you make sure that, that's something lands, because people react to things that they relate to, that feel human. That how is it going to impact their lives? How is it going to impact their business? How is it going to impact, why does this thing that you are promoting, why will this make me want to work with you or buy your goods or whatever it is? And if you think about it in those terms, it kind of changes a little bit about the things that you are most excited about in your business.
That also makes me think about the idea, or you're driving home the idea of not being myopic about what it is that you're trying to do, because we know in history and in recent history and in ancient history that people look at what they think is important and have failed miserably.
Right.
Okay, because they are like, oh yeah, this is going to work. Let me go into a different market. Let me go into a different, selling whatever XYZ product in another country or something. And they're like never doing any surveys or anything like that. Spend hundreds of millions of dollars and say, wow, that didn't work, because they were so myopic. They thought that their story was going to translate to a different market, whether it be domestic or international or whatever. So I think to remind people that having the dialogues that you're saying, Ivy, is so key to getting that feedback, because just because I think something's important or I think something's going to resonate doesn't mean it will.
Well, and we go through this a lot when we work with clients and they want a press release about something. And sometimes you have very impressive data that you might want to share. And here's a fresh tip. People don't really care about data, right? People care about the impact. And so it's nice to have the data as supporting facts. But if you really have impressive data, show me how it impacted one person, and take me through that story so that I can understand what that data actually means. And when you're talking about pitching to the media, people want coverage, or they want to just kind of get their story out. Think of humanizing what it is you want to say, so that it's a story and not just a data dump.
Right. Not just trying to get it over the net, but getting it over the net in a way that somebody's going to actually want to hear it. Right.
Exactly. So make it resonate.
Yeah.
Should we separate personal storytelling of a founder from a brand's narrative, or should they be connected? Like, can you tell me a little about that?
I think it depends, right? I think it depends on who the founder is. I think that is a strategic question that is going to be slightly different in every scenario, based on the circumstances of the company, the situation with the founder. But I think that there are certain brands where that alignment makes sense. We talked about Bamba and their, the values of the founder are very tied into the company. I think Patagonia, right, is another example of the, their environmental mission, very tied into their clothing that they sell. So I think if it works, yes. But I think if it doesn't, no. How's that for a good answer? If it works, do it. If it doesn't work, don't do it. How about that?
You actually help then with your clients. You do that evaluation, right? You would work with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
say, you think this is going to work, but through our studies and for what we're doing and how we're assimilating the information that you're giving us, this is probably not the way to go, right? And it could very much be the way to go, because there's also people who stay back. They're founders friends of mine that I have that are founders of their companies, and they sit back, and I'm like, man, you got to get out in front of this. You exude what it is that you're trying to get, and you're great at it, but they just are like, they don't feel that way.
Yeah.
And I guess it's a company like yours, and you could actually help them pull that out too.
So when one of the first things that I always like to do when I'm working with someone is find out about who they are, even if it seems like it's unrelated. I want to know who they are. I want to know maybe there's something in your background that actually relates very well to this work that maybe you aren't a founder. Maybe you're just the head of this organization or the head of this company. I do want to know about you because maybe you didn't realize that there's something in your background that's such a direct tie-in to this work. And if we can find out how to amplify that, that makes it that much more powerful. And even if there's not necessarily direct tie-in, I always think that finding out more about what motivates the people who are the face of anything helps to craft narratives that speak to the authenticity that we've been talking about and make it real.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, and when you work with your clients and you want to show their story, do you show that story through challenges that they've been through, or through like peaks of the stories? Like, can you elaborate on that?
So I think it's a combination. We said earlier, right? The Brene Brown, share from the scar, not from the wound. I think that challenges. First of all, I always love the story of an underdog that overcame a challenge, and my money is always on the underdog because they've proven they can do it, right? That to me is a good sign, and someone that I want to align with also. I recently interviewed a woman who she's actually the executive director of a hunger relief network. And she is super successful and doing amazing things. And when she was younger, she and her family were on food stamps. And so she's approaching this problem from a very real place. And when she talks about it, she's able to do so in a very real way because she knows what it's like on the other side. And when she talks to people, she shares her story so that people know that she gets it and she's not playing around. And people take her, not that they wouldn't take her seriously otherwise, but they listen a little differently when she speaks because this woman knows what she's talking about. And when she says that this is what's needed and these are the solutions, who knows better, right, than she does. And so that to me is, a great example of sharing a challenge and using it as a way to, is almost like an endorsement of her expertise, right? She has all the education, she has all the other experiences, but there's a piece to that cannot be replicated. I mean, I even see it with me. I'll make this about myself for a second. When we talk about how are we going to, pitch to the media, work with clients, let's pitch to the media. Do you know how many press releases I've received over the course of my life? How packed my inbox has been with press releases. So I can tell you what's going to work. Because I tell you, I would have never read this. I never even would have opened this release. You would have sent me this press release. I would have, not only would I not have done this story, I would have thought, you probably don't even know what you're talking about if you think that this is a thing. So it's that type of real world experience, right? And sharing that helps us help others. I think. I'm not sure if I completely answered your question. I may have gone in a little bit of a circle, but
it was good.
Well, that's a huge value, but there's huge value there. That's exactly the things that people don't necessarily focus on, right? These are things that you need to know. I mean, this idea of being out here in the real world and out here running businesses, whether you're running corporations or small business, this is a full contact sport, okay? And there are lots of pieces to it. And if we're not thinking about those pieces that are going to impact us, short term and long term, right? This
Absolutely.
is how we continue to progress. So this is all valuable stuff.
Absolutely.
So what would make you open a press release? Should it be a title? Like, how can I, a small business, should write an email to you so you open it and tell a story?
So I will tell you that there are a couple of things. So a few years out of the journalism gig, but I always say you can take the girl out of the newsroom, but the newsroom's right here. So so now we're going to talk about how to land a story. There are a couple of things to consider. One is the timeliness of it, right? Why should I care about this, and why should I care about this right now? Is there a connection to what's happening in the world that allows me to talk about what's going on in the world through something that you're doing? Does your storyline tie into sort of the greater community here, the greater world? If it does, I'm interested. Okay, if I'm a journalist, I'm interested in that. I also want to see a press release that is not super salesy and over the top. And look, it's PR, right? We all put our best foot forward. We all, shine things up a little bit. But I look for authenticity even in press releases, right? Even in if you're sending me a release from your business and you're talking to me about something that your business is doing, I think that's great. My journalism lens says, how does this impact people? Why do people benefit from this? And if I feature your business, if I do a story about you, what will my audience gain from it? What will the takeaways be? Now, I know that as the business, you want customers, you want clients, but as the journalist, I'm not here to get you more clients or get you more business. I'm here to help my audience with something. And when you are putting together a press release, if you can kind of find where those worlds meet, that's how you have success. That's how you have success just in storytelling in general. When you think about, this is what our goal is as a business. This is what the audience needs. What's the narrative that bridges those two things? And when you can figure out what that is, that's the jackpot.
Mm-hmm. So, and what if a small business doesn't have a big budget to tell a story? I mean, they don't have money to, pay for PR agencies. And like, what do they do? Do they just go on social media, or are there any other, ways?
So social media, definitely. But I also think that thinking about the things that we've been talking about, and if you're a small business and you don't have a budget, there are certainly there are programs that you can look for online that will teach you how to write a press release, or will teach you how to get your narrative out there. There's a difference. I know we all know this, right? There's a difference between public relations and marketing. Public relations is really the telling of your story for the benefit of the audience. So if you don't have a big budget, just think about the things that we've been talking about and how you would put that together. And sometimes my favorite kind of media hits are the ones that beget other media hits. So reach out to your local Tap Into or your local Patch or your local paper and explain to them what you're doing. Write something up, explain to them what you're doing. Try to get your story out there, and then use that clip to then get the next one and kind of build your brand, build your branding that way.
Because those types of outlets are looking for material.
They're looking for material, and a lot of times they are going to speak directly to the people that you want to speak with, right? If you're a small business owner in, Westfield, New Jersey, okay, that's where I grew up. That's the first name that I don't live there anymore, but that for some reason is the first time that came to my head. But if you're a small business owner in Westfield, New Jersey, Yeah, it might be nice to have, your story in a national publication, but if you really want people to come into your business, where you want your local media to be the ones that are telling your customers who you are and telling your local community who you are, because that's really where you're going to get your business from.
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense.
So you have to
And
think that through too, because sometimes people do go after the big fish, right? And
Yeah.
realize, wow, I got this incredible article and they, wrote about me in XYZ magazine and whatever. And they're like, but I wonder why that didn't translate into anything, right? Because
Right.
because you were screaming in a valley. I mean, it doesn't, you're talking to people who really can't utilize your good or service.
Right. Right. And where you have such a fragmented, um, you know, um, media landscape now, and so it's really, I would say that identifying who your audience is and how you're going to reach them should take you almost longer than anything else, because that is going to be the key. And I think you said exactly right. Just a bunch of people screaming on a stage to the world's largest audience, it's not going to necessarily have the biggest impact as if you really take a look at something that, well, this is smaller, but if the ratio of the return on this is going to be so much higher, because these are the people that I really want to speak to.
Yeah. It's a form of target marketing, really.
Absolutely.
That's what it is. Yeah.
mm-hmm. So if someone watching us today or listening to us wants to start improving their brand storytelling, what would be the first steps to do that? Like how do you understand that my brand storytelling is not very good? Like, and what do you do to improve it?
I think first thing you do, which is actually one of the first things that we do when we work with clients, is we take an inventory of what does it look like? What does the public look? How does the public see us, right? If we were looking at ourselves from the outside, what are our values? What do we? Who are we? And then if you don't like what that image looks like, then it's time to change things up. And the first thing I would do is I would start by doing exactly the things that we've been talking about, which is first embrace who your voice is. Maybe it's the voice of the company. Maybe it's not just the founder. Sometimes companies, right? They have their own narratives. What is that narrative? And identify your audience. And I think if you spend time doing those two things, everything else will sort of fall into place, and the decisions that you make as a result of those two those two big deciding factors will make more sense. They'll be easier. The decisions will be easier to make because you'll have a definitive plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That was so valuable. I hope everybody who is watching us can really dive into their storytelling and brand's authenticity, and and improve it.
We've got so much here. We've got so much here in a very short period of time.
Vic, what was the first, maybe one thing that you want people to take from this stream?
That probably the most effective way for you to get not only your message out there, but get your whole starting your own, let's say, personal brand, is what Ivy was saying, is being the authentic person that you are, and not trying to create a character. I think that's probably the most, to me, as far as a takeaway would be, is not trying to create a character, trying to be who you are and see if that's going to fit or not, right? Because it's not going to always fit, but you got to be honest about that, because once you start to try to craft something, we've seen it in all kinds of entertainment and everything else, where celebrities try to create and craft, and you're like, are you freaking joking me? I used to like you. You know what I mean? And that happens all the time. And I think that to me is one of the most valuable things, is just being who you are.
Is there anything you want to change about your appearance on social media?
Is there anything I want to change? Well, actually, I need to spend some more time with Ivy, of course. Um, you know,
Done and done.
because, I got a lot of things to brush up on. I have a 45-year career, and I'm learning something every day. And as far as specifically about the social media right now, this is a burgeoning thing for myself, is getting out here on social media and doing these kinds of things. Larry and I are going to be starting also another podcast for Playhouse, for our marketing company, and we're going to go out to locations, and that's going to help us not only gather business and things like that, but it's also going to help us in how we present our company, and what Ivy was saying, how we find our message, right? And how we start to hone that message to say, why us and not this person, right? Because let's face it, most of us, unless we are in a commoditized business that only has like one or two players, there's somebody else out there who does what we do. They may not do it exactly the way we do it, but there's somebody out there who does what we do. So what's the differentiator? And I think the more time we spend in front of the camera, the more time we spend with our clients, and the more time we spend, with other people, that's going to help us in developing, like Ivy said early in the conversation, who that niche is, what that target market is. And no, I don't want to do business with everybody. That's not my goal. That's not my goal.
So I just want to say too, Vic, we've known each other for like 10 million years, I think, give or take a million. And who you are on social media is who you are. And I think that's such a credit to you, because you have that personality that is sort of like meant for, you had a personality for social media before social media was invented, and I've known you since then. But I think that you're actually a great example of exactly all these things that we've been talking about. When I watch the content that you put out, I feel like I'm actually listening to you when we have lunch or when we're on the phone or anything like that. And so that's a perfect example of how it should be done, in my humble opinion.
Well, thank you. And I want everyone listening to know that was not a paid endorsement.
But you will be getting an invoice.
Or at least I didn't think it was. No, I really appreciate that. And I mean, I try to strive for that every day. And so obviously some days you fall short, but that is kind of, it also makes it easier.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes it easier. It always brings me back to, when Judge Judy says, if you tell the truth, you don't have to have a good memory.
Absolutely.
I mean,
So true.
yeah, it's if it's who you are, you don't have to think about who you need to be.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean that your voice won't evolve over time.
Sure.
Right. You're as things, absolutely. There's an evolution that kind of happens to all of us as we go, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So Ivy, then a few last words from you. What do you want people to take from this conversation? Or maybe there are a few more things that you want to tell them.
Well, I think I think I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier, which is that the most powerful, valuable thing that we all have is our story. And if you look at your story and you think of it as something that has value, you treat it a little differently. You understand why it's such an asset, and you do with it what you would do with any other huge asset that you have. And so that, I think, is, if there's one takeaway for me from this conversation, is if everyone could just think of their story as the most valuable thing that they have, and what would you do with the most valuable thing in the world? How would you use that to help your business grow? That's your story.
This is so true, because I just lived your words, a few days ago, because like sometimes I have a hobby that I'm doing on the side, and sometimes I think like, why would anyone care, right? And then I started posting it on Instagram, and I was just like uncovering everything, every ugly thing of my journey. And I saw so many people responding to me, and sharing their stories and sharing, their feedback and just, like appreciation. And I was like, this is exactly what you're saying right now. Every journey is valuable and everybody has something to tell.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of times when we share things that are like the ugly parts that maybe people don't always like to share, I'm always amazed at the people who say, oh my gosh, me too. And I didn't know that it was okay to talk about that or share that. I thought I was, living by myself, feeling this thing or having gone through this. And then when we know that someone else experienced, that's building community, the power of that. And that's a connection. Those people that reached out to you, they will be connected to you because they feel that meaningful, authentic connection, and they will be connected to you for a very long time to come.
Yeah. So true. And as a marketing person, I kind of like to talk about, vulnerable things and ugly things, but I understand that at some point you kind of start hyping on this, and you have to balance it out to kind of like tell a story but not overshare it, so everybody's like, oh my gosh, she's crying again.
And that goes back to, right, vulnerability, challenges without inspiration, without some sort of resolution feels like complaining, and that's not what you want to do, right? No one wants to connect with someone just to hear them complain about everything, but people will connect to see, you had this issue, how did you get out of that? Because now maybe if I'm going through the same thing, you're going to inspire me of how maybe I can get out of it too.
Differently, and then wow, I didn't even think of it that way. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. It was a very powerful conversation. Thank you, Ivy, for joining us this morning. Thank you, Vic, for providing this space to share stories, to share knowledge.
I love it. And before we get off, Ivy, I want to make sure that I'm going to see you at April 4th to Meet the Mayors in, over in West Orange. Okay.
I will be there. I guess now if I say I'm going to be there, this is on video and it will be held against me in a court of law. Yes.
Exactly. This way I can nail you down now. Okay, good.
I'll be there. I'll be there.
Yeah, now we have witnesses. So thank you everyone for listening. Thank you everyone for watching. If you have any questions for Vic and Ivy, please comment under any post that we do, and we'll make sure that we answer and we'll get back to you with the feedback. Thank you, Ivy, again. Thank you, Victor.
Thank you both so much. This was so fun. Thank you. I appreciate it.